If you'd told me 10 years ago that I'd be signing divorce papers in a dusty law office off Route 9 in Laredo, Texas, I'd have laughed and poured you another beer. But life has this cruel way of turning even the most ordinary men into strangers to themselves. My name's Ryan Foster. I'm 44 years old. 13 years ago, I married a woman I thought I'd grow old with. Lydia. She had this way of lighting up a room that made you feel like maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as hard as it always seemed. We met at a 4th of July picnic in Tyler, both sweating through our shirts in that brutal Texas heat, and within 6 months, we were married. The first few years weren't perfect, but they were ours. Small apartment, cheap beer, lots of laughter. We fought, sure, what couple doesn't? But I believed in what we had. I built us a life. Literally. I run a small home renovation business, and every room we lived in had my sweat in its drywall. Somewhere around year 9, though, things started shifting. Subtle at first. She stopped laughing at my jokes. Started locking her phone. Our Friday nights became hers alone, some girls' wine and paint thing that seemed to last later and later each week. I chalked it up to burnout. Or boredom. I kept working, thinking if I just brought in more money, planned a nice trip, maybe she'd come back to the woman I married. Then came the Bachelorette party. Her best friend Sam was getting married in New Orleans, and Lydia made it clear she was going, no debate. Said it was just for the weekend. Said I shouldn't worry. The worrying started anyway. She came back from New Orleans looking different, tanned, tired, too cheerful. It was like someone pressed reset on her personality, only this version didn't look me in the eye for more than 2 seconds at a time. I asked how the trip was. She shrugged and said, fine, just wild. Then she went upstairs and took a tower shower. That night, I sat on the back porch with a beer, staring at the dark shapes of the trees and wondering if this was the beginning of something ending. I'd had doubts before, like most people do. But doubt is a whisper. This felt like a shout. A week later, I got a call from my doctor about a routine checkup. Nothing major, just some blood work I'd done the month before. He said we needed to talk. When I came in, he looked me in the eyes and told me I'd tested positive for an STD. That moment, that single sentence, split my life clean in two. I hadn't been with anyone else. Not in years. Not once. So I asked the question you never want to have to ask, could there be a mistake? And he said, no. Not unless I'd been unfaithful or my wife had. My ears rang the whole drive home. My hands couldn't stop shaking. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the driveway for what felt like an hour, watching the front door like it might suddenly open and give me all the answers. But nothing came out. Nothing except the truth sitting heavy on my chest. I wish I could tell you I walked through that front door like a storm, demanding answers, flipping tables, breaking plates. But I didn't. I walked in like a man carrying a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. Quiet. Careful. Shaking. Lydia was in the kitchen folding laundry, humming something off-key. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds before she noticed me. She gave me a distracted smile, asked if I wanted dinner. I said I'd already eaten. Lie. I hadn't eaten in almost a day. I didn't bring it up then. Couldn't. My mouth wouldn't form the words. I felt like I was choking on them. I just nodded and said I was tired. Another lie. Sleep was the last thing my body wanted. Over the next few days, I became an actor in my own house. Smiling at the right times. Answering when spoken to. Sitting next to her on the couch like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't cracked in two. But inside I was unraveling. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. I did what most men in my position do when the ground beneath them starts to buckle. I started looking. Her phone was locked, but she'd gotten too comfortable, too careless. I found a backup of her iCloud messages on our shared laptop. Took me about 15 minutes to find what I wish I never had. Messages from a guy named T. No last name. Just T. Most of them were vague and flirty, emojis, jokes, I miss you. But then there was one that changed everything. He said, I hope you're feeling okay. I've got it too, but it's manageable. I didn't read anything else. I couldn't. My hands went numb. That was the moment I stopped loving her. I don't mean it faded. I mean it snapped, like a rope pulled too tight for too long. Gone. Just like that. 13 years, wiped out in a sentence and a timestamp. I printed out a screenshot. Folded it. Put it in an envelope and slid it into the drawer where we kept our tax paperwork. I wanted her to find it. Not right away, but one day. And that night, I slept like I hadn't in weeks. The next morning, I woke up before the sun and made coffee like I always did. It was strange how muscle memory still worked, even when your heart was broken beyond recognition. Lydia came downstairs in her robe, yawning like the world hadn't changed. Like she hadn't detonated our marriage and just kept walking through the wreckage barefoot and oblivious. She kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong. I let her. I wasn't ready for the confrontation yet. I needed to get my head straight. I needed a plan. So I started small. I pulled out every financial document we owned. Bank statements, tax returns, retirement accounts. I had built us a stable life, quietly and consistently. Most of the assets were in my name, not out of selfishness, just practicality. She'd always said paperwork made her anxious. So I handled it. All of it. That turned out to be the best thing I ever did. Within a week, I had closed our joint checking account and opened a new one under a separate bank. I moved most of the funds discreetly, left enough to keep the bills running so she wouldn't notice. I wasn't being vindictive, not yet. I was being smart, strategic. Then came the lawyer. I made an appointment with a guy in San Antonio I found through a buddy in the trades. He used to work divorce court, knew all the ugly angles. I brought him everything, explained the situation, showed him the test results, the screenshot, the timeline. He didn't say much, just nodded and made notes. Finally, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're going to be okay. You're doing the right thing." It was the first time anyone had said that out loud. I walked out of that office lighter than I'd felt in months. That night, Lydia fell asleep before me. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the room. I looked over at her, the woman I once built a future around, and felt nothing but distance. We were already divorced in my heart. The paperwork was just a formality now. It happened on a Tuesday night. There wasn't a plan, no speech rehearsed in front of a mirror. Just a silence so thick between us it finally collapsed under its own weight. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, TV flickering some cooking show neither of us was watching. Lydia scrolled on her phone. I held the remote in my hand, not even pressing the buttons, just holding it like a crutch. I turned to her and said, "I know." She didn't look up right away, just blinked, like she hadn't heard me. Then slowly, very slowly, she met my eyes. "I got tested last week," I said. "Routine blood work." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. No words, just guilt. You can always smell it when it hits the air. It's metallic, like blood. "They called me in," I continued. "Said I tested positive for something I couldn't have gotten unless something happened." She started shaking her head, but not denying, not yet. More like someone waking from a nightmare, trying to pretend it wasn't real. "I haven't been with anyone but you," I said, "for years. And I trusted you to be the same." Then I paused. That silence was a blade. I let it hang between us. Her eyes welled up fast. Too fast. She didn't even ask what I had. She already knew. "I saw the messages," I added quietly. "Not all of them. Just enough." She covered her mouth with both hands. A sound came out. Not quite a sob, not quite a gasp. Some guttural thing from a place between panic and shame. "I didn't want to believe it," I said. "But you made me." And then I stood up. Not in anger, not to threaten, just to remove myself from the rot still spreading in that room. She reached for me, not to stop me, just out of reflex. And I took a step back. "I don't hate you," I said. She flinched. "I just don't know who you are anymore. And I don't think you do either." Then I left the room. No slamming doors. No dramatic exits. Just the soft sound of a man finally letting go. The next morning, she didn't come down for coffee. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my mug like it might spell out some answer I hadn't found the night before. The house was too quiet. That particular kind of silence that feels like it's listening. I half expected her to pack a bag and leave before sunrise. That would have been cleaner, easier. But Lydia had a talent for prolonging damage. When she finally emerged, her face was blotchy, her hair still wet. No makeup. She looked like the version of herself I hadn't seen in years. The girl from back, when we still laughed in the mornings. She sat across from me and tried to say something twice before anything came out. I just watched. Not coldly, just distant. I didn't have anything left in me to offer. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "I was drunk. It was stupid. It was one night." I nodded. Not because I forgave her, but because I believed that part. One night. That's usually how it starts. That one careless moment you think will stay buried. But it didn't stop there, I said, more to myself than to her. She went still. "You kept talking to him. You kept choosing him. Over and over." Tears slid down her face, but I didn't rush to comfort her. "That part of me was gone. You could have told me. You could have come clean the second you found out. But you let me find out from a doctor. She tried to say it was because she was ashamed, that she was scared, that she didn't want to hurt me. You didn't want to hurt me, I repeated, my voice steady. But you did. Every day you stayed quiet. Every second you let me touch you, sleep beside you, share air with you. Then I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. I'm not yelling. I'm not throwing anything. But don't mistake my calm for forgiveness. She covered her face. I let her. I stood up, took my coffee, and walked out the front door. It was the first time in months the sun didn't feel heavy on my skin. The day after I told Lydia I knew, I went back to San Antonio. Same lawyer, same office. But something felt different this time. The first visit had been about shock, survival. This time, it was about strategy. He had a manila folder waiting for me on the desk. Inside, draft papers, divorce petition, asset inventory, preliminary custody agreement. Even though we had no kids, it was procedure. He slid it toward me like a weapon I hadn't realized I was ready to use. I kept it straightforward, he said. Uncontested, for now. You've got most of the assets. The house is in your name, the business is in your name. No joint debt. I stared at the stack of paper like it might catch fire if I touched it. It was surreal, holding the end of something that had defined over a decade of my life. Still, I nodded. I want to keep it clean, I said. No drama. No courtroom brawls. Just done. He nodded. Then file first. I hadn't realized how important that was, being the one to file. He said it set the tone. The one who files has the advantage in structure, in momentum, in message. I would be the petitioner. She would be the respondent. That mattered. By Friday, the papers were notarized. I drove straight from the lawyer's office to the county clerk. Walked in with the envelope like I was delivering a bomb wrapped in beige legal paper. And honestly, in a way, I was. Afterward, I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there with my hand on the steering wheel and a sense of finality that felt heavier than I expected. That night, I told Lydia. She was in the living room, curled up under a blanket. When I said the words, that I'd filed, that it was happening, she didn't yell. She didn't plead. She just closed her eyes and nodded. That was the moment I knew. We were already gone long before the papers were signed. I moved out the next day. Didn't make a scene. Didn't rent a truck. Just loaded my pickup with a few boxes, work boots, worn jeans, toiletries, and the photo of my parents that used to hang above the kitchen table. I left the wedding album on the bookshelf. Didn't even touch it. Marcos met me outside the unit on the west side of town, handed me the key like we were trading secrets. He didn't ask a single question, just patted my shoulder and said, "It's yours as long as you need." It wasn't much. Small one-bedroom. Kitchen smelled faintly of paint and lemon cleaner. The kind of place people usually pass through, not settle into. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. That night, I sat on the floor with a beer and a cold sandwich, staring at a wall that didn't know our history. No wedding photos. No shared toothbrushes. No reminders of a life that had rotted underneath the surface while I kept smiling through it. And it was quiet, not the heavy silence of the old house, but clean quiet. Like turning off a machine that had been buzzing for years. I didn't sleep much, but when I did, I dreamed about nothing. No faces. No voices. Just blank space. The next morning, I got up early and went to work like usual, framing a porch for a widow over on the north end. She talked a lot. About her grandkids, her garden, her late husband, and how he still showed up in her dreams sometimes. I smiled and nodded and built her porch like it was sacred. And maybe it was. At lunch, I got a text from Lydia. It was short. Just said, "I told my sister." She cried. I didn't reply. I didn't know her that anymore. I wasn't being cruel. I was just done. A week passed. By then, the divorce petition had been officially logged into the county system. My lawyer called to confirm it. Said we'd likely hear back within 2 weeks about the court date. I thanked him, hung up, and sat with the weight of it. It's a strange thing to be halfway out of a life. To be legally married but emotionally evacuated. Every day felt like walking through an empty house where someone else had packed up your memories. Lydia and I barely spoke now. When we did, it was all business. Bills. Accounts. She asked what I wanted to do about the photo albums. I told her to keep them. I didn't say the truth, that I couldn't bear to look at them. The silence between us wasn't angry. It was tired, like a fire that had burned too long and finally snuffed itself out. I thought I'd miss her. And in some ways, I did. But not her, not the woman who had betrayed me. I missed the version I invented, the one I built a life around. The one who never really existed, except in my head. One night, I sat in my new apartment with a beer and an aching sort of nostalgia. I started scrolling through old photos, birthdays, vacations. That random Tuesday we got caught in the rain and laughed until our clothes stuck to our skin. She looked happy in those pictures. So did I. But I didn't trust that happiness anymore. It felt staged now. Or maybe I just saw it through a different lens. I didn't delete the photos. I couldn't. Erasing them felt like erasing proof that I'd once tried, that we both did, maybe. So I moved them all into a folder I labeled before. That night she texted me again. Can we talk? Not about the legal stuff. Just talk. I stared at that message for a long time. And then I replied. There's nothing left to say. I turned off my phone, set it face down, and climbed into bed. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't wake up feeling like I'd lost something. The court date came faster than I thought it would. There was no big showdown, no screaming across a courtroom. Just a clerk calling our names and a judge who barely looked up from the stack of files on his desk. It took 11 minutes, I counted. Lydia sat 2 seats away, wearing a black blouse I remembered from a dinner years ago. She didn't cry. Neither did I. When it was done, we walked out of the courthouse like 2 people who'd never shared a bed, let alone a life. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, as if she might say something. But she didn't. I nodded. She nodded back. And that was it. The thing about endings is that they don't feel like endings when they happen. They feel like silence. Like breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. That night, I went back to my apartment and took inventory of what I had left. A handful of clothes. A bag of tools. A mattress on the floor. My dignity, scraped up but intact. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't text anyone. Didn't post anything. I just sat with it. A few days later, I went back to the house to grab the last box. Lydia wasn't home. I let myself in with the spare key, walked through the hall like a stranger casing the place. Everything was in the same place, but none of it felt familiar anymore. The only thing left of me was a jacket hanging in the hall closet and a drawer full of screws I'd always meant to sort. I didn't take either. Some things you just leave behind, not because you don't care, but because you finally learned not to keep carrying what won't carry you back. No one tells you healing doesn't come like a wave. It creeps in slow, inconsistent, a few inches at a time. You don't wake up one day and feel whole again. You just notice that you're not crying over coffee anymore. That the silence doesn't feel suffocating. That, for some strange reason, your laugh sounds real again. It had been over a month since the divorce was finalized. The papers were signed, stamped, filed away like they were just another line in some bureaucratic to-do list. And yet, somehow, they marked the start of something I hadn't expected. Not freedom, exactly, but space. Space to breathe. To think without interruption. To remember who I was before all this. My apartment still looked halfway unpacked. Mattress on the floor, mismatched chairs, a lamp that flickered if I looked at it wrong. But it was mine. Every creak in the walls, every empty shelf, every chip plate, mine. I started running again. Just a couple blocks at first. My legs hated me for it. But there was something about the rhythm of feet on pavement, lungs burning, sweat on skin. It reminded me I was alive. And still moving forward. One Saturday afternoon, I took a drive. No destination. Just back roads and country static on the radio. I ended up at a truck stop I hadn't seen in years. Bought a root beer and sat on the hood of my truck, watching the sky go orange behind the highway. That's when it hit me, the feeling I hadn't had in months. Peace. Not because everything was fixed. Not because I had all the answers. But because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not for her to explain. Not for me to heal. Not for the past to suddenly make sense. I don't hate her. I don't love her either. She's just someone I used to know, a chapter in a book I've already finished. And I'm not going to reread it.